Have you ever wondered what it's like to get a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning? The sun hasn't even come up yet. Your heart is probably sinking because it's 5 o'clock in the morning and those phone calls aren't usually good. But our guest tonight got the phone call that changed his life. It was in October of 2012 when he got the phone call letting him know, Dr. Lefkowitz, you've won the Nobel Prize. Please join me in welcoming the 2012 Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, Dr. Bob Lefkowitz from Duke University, who is joining us tonight alongside Janice Lintz, Dr. Susan Bernstone, Dr. Bruce Wiley, and Susie Katz. And you guys all know them. They are regulars on the show all the time. Janice is the change maker. Dr. Susan Byrne is our mental health specialist and also a public access television host. Dr. Bruce Wiley is our physician scientist and the funniest writer for Forbes. And Susie Katz is an amazing photographer who also started the nonprofit Photo Wings. Dr. Bob Lefkowitz, what was it like to get that phone call?
Well, the first thing is I didn't hear the phone because I sleep with earplugs. So I was completely oblivious to it. But then my wife, fortunately, Lynn, heard the phone, and she actually kind of knew what was going on before me because she heard a woman with a Swedish accent say something like, this is so-and-so calling from Stockholm for Professor Lefkowitz. Can you put him on? So my wife and I have somewhat differing recollections of what happened next. In her telling, she very gently nudged me until I was awake and said, honey, there's a call from Stockholm for you. In my recollection, she gave me an elbow to the ribs. But in either case, whoever's recollection is correct, I did in fact awaken. And in that moment, my mind was racing because it seemed likely that that was about the Nobel Prize. You might say, why likely? Well, I had been touted for the prize for maybe 20 years, but I never actually won. And, you know, I had gone through a phase a number of years before where I can't say I was waiting by the phone, but I was aware when it was Nobel week, and I was aware when the week passed and it wasn't my turn. So when I got the call, I can't say I was totally amazed. On the other hand, you know, people always say to me, well, were you surprised when you got the call? Well, for the reasons I just told you, no, I was not totally shocked. On the other hand, I was totally shocked. Why? Well, first of all, I always figured if it was ever my turn to come up here, that there'd be rumors, I would hear something via the grapevine. Nothing, absolutely nothing had indicated to me that I was going to win this year. The second surprise was that I was winning in chemistry rather than in medicine. I always imagined, because of the nature of my work, I would win in medicine. But the prizes, as you probably know, are announced in a set daily order. Medicine and physiology is on Monday, physics Tuesday, chemistry Wednesday, etc. So when the phone rang on Wednesday, that seemed like a bit of a surprise. My initial reaction was not one of jumping up and down and eureka and it was more one of sort of quiet satisfaction and just a nice feeling that, you know, almost relief. The monkey's off my back, and knowing that never again in my life from that moment forward would I ever have to again answer the question, Bob, when are you going to win the Nobel Prize? So that was kind of nice. And then the hour after that is very surreal because it's dark, as you said, and they tell you that the official announcement isn't coming for a little over an hour, and they tell you you're not permitted to tell anybody about it, not family, not friends, not anybody, which, everybody honors. But there you are, sitting on this amazing piece of news. So you make a pot of coffee and you sit around figuring out, who you're going to call first and this and that. But then as soon as the announcement came, all hell breaks loose. The phones are ringing in New York Times, Washington Post, AP. I have 5 adult kids living all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, and they were the top of my list. But because the phones were tied up, the instant it went public, I could not immediately call my kids. And so by the time I was able to free up any line, 3 of my 5 kids had already heard via, friends, Facebook, whatever. So that was a little disappointing, but in the end, it was fine.
Well, I don't know if you remember, my original research on success was actually on physician scientists. And you were one of the people who I originally interviewed years ago. And I said to you, Dr. Lefkowitz, you have come up on my results as an extreme high achiever and one of the most successful physician scientists of our generation. And you said, oh, thank you very much. And I said, congratulations on winning the Nobel. And you said to me, I got it in chemistry. I should have gotten it in medicine, physiology. And you know what I thought? You won the Nobel, man. Take the win.
Well, I came around to it. And I'll tell you another story, which was very sweet, I must say. The first night we were in Stockholm, and they call it Nobel Week, but it's more like Nobel 10 or 12 days. But the first night we were there, myself and my co-winner, Dr. Brian Kobilka, who had been a research fellow in my laboratory back in the 80s, now a professor at Stanford. So we were being entertained at dinner by the Nobel Chemistry Committee, which is out of the Swedish Academy of Sciences. And the conversation got around to the fact that the prize was in chemistry, not in medicine. And he told us, he said, you actually, the two of you were, there's often a lot of overlap between the two committees. And it was not all that unusual, actually, because the work we did was largely biochemistry, which is chemistry, but it was the biochemistry of drug receptors, so it's really medicine. Anyway, he said that year we had risen to the top, and we're the top of the list in both the chemistry and the medicine committees. He said, and we quote, we had a tug of war and we won. So that was kind of a nice feeling.
So
part of it said, well, you could have given us both. But anyway, it didn't happen.
Well, for everyone watching, Dr. Lefkowitz has written his autobiography. It was actually written with one of his trainees, Randy Hall. And it's not surprising that he wrote his autobiography with a trainee, that he shared his Nobel with another trainee. First of all, I want to encourage everyone to pick this book up and read it, because I have interviewed many Nobel Prize winners. Bob Lefkowitz is by far the funniest and most transparent one I have ever met. And his book leaves nothing off the table. I was telling him before we aired that I was reading this recently on a plane and I was laughing out loud and people were staring at me because it was so funny. Every piece of it was so funny. So thank you so much for writing this and for sharing this. It is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of my favorite subjects, but something which is I think about from time to time is, there are a number of relationships between humor and the process of scientific discovery. I mean, both of them at their heart basically involve seeing relationships between seemingly disparate things that perhaps not everybody would see. And of course, that is the essence of making a scientific discovery. But also in terms of seeing the humor in situations. And I'm not a guy who tells jokes. People always tell me I'm funny, and I like that because I do have a kind of a humorous outlook on life, but I don't tell jokes. The humor that I see is just the humor in everyday life. In fact, one of my fantasies has always been to be a stand-up comic. And I've gotten to do that once or twice, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, it's interesting because you were, let's go back to the early days. You were a student in New York, in the Bronx. You went to high school at the Bronx High School of Science, where you were the 8th former student to win a Nobel Prize, right? They've gotten more than most countries, right?
Right, correct.
And then you were part of a group that's called the Yellow Berets. Can you talk a little bit about the Yellow Berets and the Battle of Bethesda?
Okay, so the Yellow Berets was really an amazing phenomenon. So during the Vietnam War, there was a lottery draft for all men over 18. But for physicians, there was a draft called the doctor draft, and there was no lottery. That is to say, all medical graduates were drafted, were conscripted. You were drafted upon graduation from medical school. You were given another 1 or 2 years of deferment to get some postgraduate clinical training. And then you went in, Army, Navy, Air Force, or Public Health Service. And except for the Public Health Service, all 3 other services, you were pretty much guaranteed of spending a year in Vietnam, which obviously nobody was interested in doing. It was a very, very unpopular war. There were riots, demonstrations. But the only legal way you could get out as a physician of going to Vietnam was to be drafted into the Public Health Service. So, of course, that's what everybody wanted to do, including me. And as a result, it was extraordinarily competitive to get into the United States Public Health Service. So they got the best and the brightest. I was fortunate to get a commission as a lieutenant commander in the Public Health Service because I had very high standing academically, had gone to good schools, top recommendations. And so I was drafted into the Public Health Service and sent to the NIH for 2 years, where I basically spent 20% of my time doing clinical work in endocrinology, as it turns out. And 80% of the time I was assigned to a laboratory to learn how to do bench research. We were somewhat sarcastically referred to as Yellow Berets, a sort of a joke based on the Green Berets, which of course were our most elite, commando forces, heroic commando forces. And here we were, as you said, fighting the Battle of Bethesda, if you will. So it was kind of a pejorative, at least initially. But so that's what the Yellow Berets were. But the remarkable thing was, because they were so selective, they got the most amazing people into this program. The official name was the Associate Training Program at the NIH, but everybody called us Yellow Berets. To give you a sense of what came out of that program, consider the following. First of all, there were very few people in it, maximum 100 a year. We were all young physicians, a couple of years out of medical school. Most of us, overwhelmingly, most of us, with little to no hands-on experience in a laboratory ever, no research experience. Nonetheless, if you take the years 1964 to 1972, peak years of the Vietnam War, 10 of us who came out of that program went on to win the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
Moreover, my entire generation of professors of medicine, medical academician, physician scientists, We all came out of that program, all the professors, the deans, the heads of hospitals, etc. Just to give you an even crazier example, in my class, if you will, those of us who went to the NIH in 1968, that was 2 years after medical school graduation, and then left in 1970. So that 2-year hitch. 4 of us won the Nobel Prize. Myself, for work on receptors, Michael Brown, and by the way, the receptors that I discovered are the targets of about a third of all FDA-approved drugs today. That's 700 drugs. Mike Brown and Joe Goldstein won the prize for their work on the LDL receptor, which led to the statins. And Harold Varmus won the Nobel Prize for discovering oncogenes, which are responsible for cancer. So in aggregate, the work of 4 of us from that one class, had a huge impact on medicine. And oh, by the way, there was one other guy in our class that you might have heard of, a good friend of mine since those days. Name is Tony Fauci.
Wow. Now, Bob, why do you think, what was so special about getting all these people together at the NIH? And as you said, a lot of you did not have any research experience, and you didn't even like research at the beginning.
I hated it.
There? What happened?
Well, it was really a magical time, and people have spent a lot of effort trying to figure out, can we recreate that? I don't know the answer, but so far there's no good evidence that we can. But it was a combination of 2 main things. One, the pressure of the Vietnam War to push people like me and most of us who were, very bright, young, striving, academically oriented physicians, but not necessarily with any interest in research. But the pressure of the Vietnam War essentially drove us, herded us down this chute to try to avoid serving in and supporting that very unpopular war. So that was half the equation. The other half of the equation were these remarkable mentors, which were at the NIH, senior scientists, some MDs, some PhDs, but just a remarkable group that had been assembled there. And you throw that all together, and it was just a one-off. And there's never again, since that time, been assembled in one place such a remarkable collection of people.
Unbelievable. And one of your fellow Yellow Berets was actually there when you won the Nobel, Mike Brown.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was sitting. Mike Brown and Joe Goldstein are 2 of my closest friends in academia, and they were in Stockholm for a symposium, and they were sitting directly behind me. You can see Mike twiddling his thumbs if you look closely at the video of that.
Twiddling his thumbs.
He really is. Take a look at it. I think he's bored. I'm not making this up.
Well, he's been through it before.
Exactly. And in fact, Mike and Joe won the prize, unlike myself, with almost 2 extremes. They won very, very early. They were in their early 40s when they won. Okay, so that was like 20 years before I won. So who knows how many of these things he had sat through before. For most of us, it's, a thing of a lifetime. He probably had sat through, who knows, a dozen of these ceremonies before and was bored silly.
Wow. Well, a lot of the people who you mentioned, in addition to yourself, Tony Fauci and Mike Brown, they're all in my upcoming book, The Success Factor, and people can hear their stories along with yours. One of the things that you talked about quite a bit when we chatted, and also in your book, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm, you talked quite a bit about failure and accidents and luck. But I don't believe it was just failure and accidents and luck. I think you were ready for those opportunities, and you pounced when they happened. How do you see failure?
So I was introduced to failure at the NIH. I have to say, in all due immodesty, that prior to going to the NIH, I had never really encountered significant failure of any duration in really almost anything I had ever done. Of course, I had failed at things, but very quickly I was able to master them. But here at the NIH, I found for the first at least year, if not year and a half, despite the very best effort that I could put out, I could not succeed in doing what I was trying to do. And that was an absolutely new experience for me. And I did not handle it well, to be frank. And my two mentors helped keep me afloat emotionally until I finally met with success after, I don't know, 15 or 18 months and got things to work, published my first few papers, got the exhilaration.
Hold on, you didn't just publish a few papers. You published it in PNAS, Science, and Nature.
Well, there was that.
Those are the biggest papers.
Those
just glossed over that.
my first three papers. It is funny to look back on now. But so I really met with failure. And by just survival, I learned sort of how to deal with it and what the importance of it is. I actually give a talk from time to time at Duke called How to Deal with Failure and Rejection in Research. And understanding the importance of failure, the ubiquity of failure, and really how to deal with it, I think is one of the most important things for any scientist to learn, something they must learn. But it's not just scientists. I think it's absolutely everybody. I belong to the most remarkable organization that nobody's ever heard of. It's called the Academy of Achievement. It's you can Google it, Academy of Achievement. It was started about 60 years ago by a philanthropist named Reynolds, and now is carried on by his son and daughter-in-law. And basically, it's an organization of high achievers. And if you're interested in broadly in the concept of success, you should really go to their website and see what's doing. But basically, over the years, hundreds of people have been inducted into this organization. They meet once or twice, once every year, once every couple of years. And they bring together high achievers in every field of endeavor that you can imagine: science, the arts, law, entertainment, sports, the military, whatever, together with several hundred young learners, as young as high school or as senior as junior faculty members. And basically the achievers give talks about their careers. The young people listen, ask questions, and then there are all kinds of small group meetings and other things. The one thing that is virtually present in every talk I've ever heard there, and that encompasses every field that I just told you about, is failure, especially failure early on in one's career, how important it is, and how you learn from it, et cetera, et cetera.
But, you know, Bob, you wrote in your book the difference between a physician and a scientist. A physician, and you're a cardiologist by training. A physician follows protocol. There's a standard operating procedure of what you need to do. But as a scientist, it's the opposite of following protocol. It's all about taking calculated risks and trying and failing and learning from that failure. And it's really about pushing the boundaries in order to develop new knowledge. That's a completely different way of working your brain. And you know, one hand you have to follow the rules, and on the other hand, you write the rules.
So true. I mean, in science, if you follow the rules, or the protocols, that's called confirming somebody else's data, which means you fail.
Yeah.
And doing that requires a certain personality type or a certain outlook on life.
Yeah.
And culturally, I have found that's more difficult from certain cultures than others. Cultures I have found, this is just based on, having a very international lab for decades now. But what I find is that in certain cultures where there's tremendous respect for authority, it's more difficult for the folks to question things because they tend to sort of accept things that are coming down from on high. And if it's in the textbooks or papers have been written to a certain effect, it's very difficult for them to say, maybe that's all wrong. Or maybe that's, and this is much more commonly, maybe that's a very incomplete way of looking at it. And there's really a lot more to be learned. It takes a certain, to use a Yiddish word, chutzpah.
It takes a lot of chutzpah.
Chutzpah. Can you pronounce it?
Can I? Chutzpah.
Yeah. Good for you.
A lot of people here can pronounce.
Not everybody can. I think it's because there is no sound. You got to get a little phlegm on the soft palate. And I had a secretary, not Jewish, who refused to even try to say it, no matter how I tried to coax her.
That becomes an H, not a CH.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
So Bob, let me ask you, because my phone is just bursting here. People want to hear about Nobel Week. But before we get more to Nobel Week and what happened after you heard, I want to talk about your scientific family tree. This is the Mentor Project that's hosting us. You have mentored over 200 trainees. 200. You shared the Nobel with one of them. What was that like? How do you do that? Most people can't mentor one person.
I know. It's really interesting. As I've gotten older, and I've gotten a lot older, I have spent a lot of time thinking about how I mentored, how it all happened, that I mentored all these people, and trying to derive some principles from the mentoring that I did and that I am doing. And in fact, as you know, in my book, I have an entire chapter on my mentoring style. But the interesting thing is, through much of my career, I had no idea what I was doing. In other words, I was just too busy doing it. It reminds me a lot of one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite philosophers, Yogi Berra, the famous catcher of the New York Yankees from the 1950s, the golden age of baseball. I loved Yogi. And he said, there's so many wonderful aphorisms ascribed to him. Who knows if he ever said any of them? But one of them was Yogi. I still remember his uniform number was 8. Yogi was a really good hitter. He had a lifetime batting average of 290, but in the years I watched him, it was, he batted 300 every year, which is great. But when Yogi came up in the clutch, like the bottom of the ninth and the game is hanging with 2 outs, he invariably delivered a hit or a home run to win the game. And so he was being interviewed one time, and they asked him, Yogi, when you're up and you're trying to get a hit in the clutch and all the chips are down, what are you thinking? And he looked at the interviewer with some amazement on his face and he said, what? He said, how are you going to think and hit at the same time? And the point, I think, is very valid. I mean, I was so busy mentoring that I never gave a thought to what the hell I was doing. But, I think that they caught my enthusiasm, my devotion to the process of doing science and doing it as a shared activity where there's no senior and junior, but whoever's got the best idea, that's the one we're going to run with. And they kind of sensed my devotion and my amazing passion for the entire thing. And none of which, you can't fake that. All of it was genuine. But, as I say, after doing this for decades, I finally did get around to thinking about how to do it. And we can talk about that. But yeah, one of my greatest senses of pride is in the fact that, a very substantial proportion of all the major figures in my field of research are people who have trained in my laboratory.
As I said, if it happened once, yeah, maybe that's luck, but 200 people and have them go on to such tremendous success, that's not luck. That's not luck. And you definitely have what I call a mentoring credo, which you wrote about in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm, which really you laid out 10 steps to being a great mentor. And as somebody who studies mentoring quite a bit, it's definitely something I agree with. Now, we're having a lot of questions come in. People really want to know more about you getting that phone call and what happened next. And that call is in October, and the Nobel awards come in December. And what was that whole thing like? And then our panel really has some great questions as well. So you got the phone call. 3 out of your 5 kids had to find out on social media.
Right.
What happened next?
So that day is kind of a blur. The first thing I remember is I was supposed to get a haircut that afternoon. Just, get a haircut once a month, whether I need it or not. And it just was scheduled that afternoon. So that had to be canceled. And of course, there was a press conference. And what seemed to catch people's attention a lot during the press conference was that I was from New York. And of course, this press conference going on here in Durham, North Carolina. Somebody asked me about my youth, and I talked about the New York Yankees that I was devoted to. And I offered gratuitously the fact that even all these years later, I guess it would be 60 years later, I still could recite the batting order and the uniform numbers of the Yankees from the early 50s.
Let's hear it.
He challenged me to do it, and I did it. And so, a lot of my favorite players were in there. But okay, after the press conference, there was a big celebration. And then the next 2 months were, probably the most frenetic that I'll ever remember. There are so many things to do. You have to write a Nobel autobiography of some length and detail, which is published. So you have to prepare that. You have to prepare your Nobel lecture, which you have to deliver during that week. It is a requirement to receive the prize that you must deliver the Nobel lecture. There are videos that have to be made, photographs that have to be taken.
I guess you got a haircut in between.
I finally got the haircut several days later, and then I guess I got a couple of others in between. The matters of dress protocol are very simple for the men. You send them your measurements for the white tie tuxedo, and when you get there, you go to the tailor shop, and they take your measurements, which they already have, and they make sure everything fits, and then they deliver the tuxedo to your room the day before the Nobel ceremonies. For the women, bless their souls, they have to wear long gowns, and so they need to bring several long gowns with them, which for most of the women involved, and by I don't just mean the recipients, I mean their spouses, other members of the family, they have to go shopping, and so it's all very stressful. It's a good stress, but stressful nonetheless. And that goes on for 2 months. I'm trying to remember, I think you get 14 tickets in addition to yourself and your spouse, to the ceremonies and the amazing Nobel banquet. But the thing is, for some people, that's a lot of tickets, and they bring all kinds of people, friends, colleagues, collaborators. I have 5 married children, 6 grandchildren, and a couple of very dear, close friends. So it was a mess.
It's like graduation tickets. You have to borrow from friends who aren't using them.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. But even those who, could have done with many fewer tickets, nonetheless, they managed to use them.
Yeah.
So, I couldn't bring any colleagues or collaborators or the president of Duke or anything like that, because my family filled all the available places.
Well, they come first.
Yeah, exactly. Family comes first. And then, of course, Nobel Week, or as I said, Nobel 10 Days, is an absolutely remarkable experience. It's a fairy tale. It's like living in a fairy tale. You are put up in the so-called Grand Hotel, which is grand. It's amazing. It has hosted the Nobel festivities since the very first one, which is, I think, 1905. It snowed the whole time we were there and the day we arrived. So any good fairy tale has snow, right? So that was great. And it was just, one thing after another, receptions, dinners, white tie events. My daughter.
Now let's talk about that, because in the book, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm, you talked about something that happened to your daughter at one of the dinners in front of the king and queen. Can you share
that's an amazing story. So I was hosting a dinner for my entourage, let's call it, the night before the Nobel events, actually 2 nights before. And 4 of my 5 were married, but my daughter, Mara, age 40 at the time, was there with her boyfriend, Eric. And we were sitting around the table, and toward the end of dinner, this guy who's normally very confident and self-possessed came over and whispered in my ear that, could I step outside? He wanted to talk to me briefly about something. So we stepped outside, and after some fumbling around, it became clear that he said he wanted to ask for my daughter Mara's hand in marriage, and he was asking for my permission, which, amazing, I didn't know anybody ever did that anymore. So I didn't have to think very long. I mean, first of all, I genuinely liked them, liked this guy. He's a really good fella. Second of all, they'd been going together for 5 years. But I think most importantly, I said, well, she's 40 years old and she's not getting any younger. Let's get this done. So I said, absolutely, you go right ahead. And he said, well, okay. He said, but I just want you to know, I'm not going to detract at all from any attention coming to you. I'll find a quiet place, time to do this. Anyway, so now it's 2 days later. We've had the Nobel ceremony. We've had the Nobel banquet, which is beyond. The stories about that, 1,500 people. The banquet's over. Maybe 300 people are dancing in a big ballroom, and maybe 1,000 of us are drinking champagne in another ballroom. At one end of that ballroom is the king and queen, and each of the laureates with their spouses or significant others has been given a 10-minute slot to talk one-on-one or two-on-two with the king and queen. And I still remember we were the last ones. Our slot was 11:30 to 11:40 p.m. And we had a nice chat. Went well. And then we left the king and queen. And we were standing maybe 100 feet away from him with my whole entourage. All of a sudden, Eric, and we're all in white tie. All of a sudden, Eric drops to one knee and proposes right on the floor there to Mara. Fortunately, my 12-year-old grandson had the presence of mind to whip out his iPhone. Meanwhile, nobody knew this was coming at this time, including me. And also, he had asked me to keep his intentions entirely secret from everybody, which I had, except for my wife.
Because he wants you to do this quietly and not detract
exactly.
from your Nobel.
And here he is in front of 1,000 people.
And the king and queen.
And the king and queen. And in the frame of this, you can see 3 of the other Nobel Prize winners, and everybody breaks into applause because they can see what's going on here. Obviously, some guy is proposing to Lefkowitz's daughter. Meanwhile, out of the corner of my eye, I'm looking over at the king, and I can see he's watching the whole thing. So we get done with that, and of course now we're all hugging and celebrating, and Mara's crying, and here comes the attaché, the official attaché from the king. He's in uniform with epaulettes and medals and all kinds of stuff. And he comes over and he says, the king and queen watched with a lot of interest what just went on here. He just wants to make sure that he understood what was happening. And I said, well, this young man has just proposed marriage to my daughter, and she has accepted him. He shakes his head, trots back over to the king. And now, of course, the whole family were watching the king, and the guy's explaining it to him. So as soon as he's done, the king looks over, catches my eye, and he goes like this.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway,
that was for quiet engagement.
Exactly. So anyway, and they lived happily ever after. They're married. They live in San Francisco.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was an incredible story, and I loved reading it in your book. Wow. Susie, I know you have a question.
Yeah, we do a lot of interviewing in my nonprofit, and the first question I always ask is, was there something that happened when you were very, very young, even as a child, that helped you develop skills that still serve you today?
I would say I was a very precocious reader. In fact, I used to fake illness. When I was in public school, grades 1 to 6, I used to fake illness, typically a stomach ache, so that I could stay home. And as soon as my mother was gone, I would put a stack of books on a chair and read them. And I was very precocious. I used to look at the New York Times book review section as a child. And there were a couple of book clubs. One was called Book of the Month Club, and the other one I think was Literary Guild. Got to remember this was in the 50s, and I would fill out these coupons, which said that if you would agree to buy 4 books over the course of a year from a list that they had, you could choose a free set of books.
Oh,
okay, so I would fill out these coupons without telling my parents, of course, and send them off. And I would get these free sets of books. And then, of course, it would obligate my parents to buy additional books to read. They weren't necessarily always thrilled. But in this way, I acquired, amongst other things, Winston Churchill's 6-volume set on the Second World War, and Carl, I forget his name, the author, but there's a very famous set, 5-volume set on the biography of Abraham Lincoln. And in fact, I'm looking at, I still have the set of the Second World War. The 6 volumes are sitting right down there. They're looking pretty tattered. Because I was probably 11 or 12 when I was reading those books. And anyway, the ability to read lots of material and absorb facts, not because I was trying to memorize them, but just because I was so entranced by it all, I think stood me in very good stead.
And you finished high school at 16. You were young.
Did.
And college in 3 years. You were in a hurry. Wow.
Yeah. And medical school at 23, and I looked 18. I don't know if any of you ever watched that TV show many years ago, Doogie Howser, where you had this. Yeah,
you were Doogie.
I was Doogie. I would often get the question, from patients, well, are you really a doctor, or can you get the real doctor or the senior doctor? This was true even when I was truly the senior doctor, like I was a senior resident running the emergency room. And they would say, well, I want to see who's in charge here. And I'd say, I'm afraid I'm in charge here.
You're looking at them. Janice, I know you have questions.
Hi, Dr. Lefkowitz. I'm interested. So I always heard that the Nobel process is very complicated, and there's a lot of jockeying to raise your profile. And I'm wondering, how did you raise your profile to get to the top of the pile? Like, what type of marketing did you do for this?
That's an easy one. Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing whatsoever, other than publish a lot, go to a lot of meetings. When they get interested in you, they start inviting you to Stockholm fairly often, because they have what are called Nobel symposia, Nobel meetings. And I could tell they were getting real interested in my area, because in the, I think, 12 years or 13 years before I won the prize, I was invited to Stockholm 10 times.
Wow.
Okay, that's a lot. And so I guess you could say what I did to increase my profile is I accepted every invitation. I went, I gave my talks, and that was it. Now, I'm aware of some, what I consider very, very egregious examples of exactly what you're talking about. And I found it offensive at the time, and I find it offensive now. One guy who will remain nameless won the prize. He's now deceased. Spent something like 15 years. He was an American. Spent 15 years working every summer in the laboratory of a very prominent scientist at the Karolinska Institute. Karolinska Institute is the body that gives the medicine prize, okay? He would actively campaign for the prize. And then in the year that he won the prize, so the lab that he worked in was run by a woman scientist. They published 40 papers together in the course of those 15 years. He did, in fact, eventually win the prize. He shared it with two other individuals. And guess what? In the year that he won, she was the chairman of the Medicine Prize Committee.
Oh.
So that gives you an example of how this works at the extreme edge. And yeah, I think there is a fair bit of that kind of politicking. But you are right. It's a complex process. Very, very secretive. I told you, I picked up absolutely no rumors of any kind that this was about to happen. So it's just absolutely amazing. They told me that they work on special computers so that nobody can trace the fact that, for example, in the summer before I got the prize, that the Nobel Committee is doing a lot of investigation online of Lefkowitz. I mean, they have special computers, and I mean, it's really amazing. And in general, you are in nomination for years.
Wow.
Sometimes for decades
Wow.
before you win. And
Wow.
you don't win if you were nominated once or twice. You can look at the archives. They release all the information 50 years later. And if you go back and look, you'll see that the way it works is somebody gets nominated. Next year, maybe they pick up 2 nominations. Next year, maybe 5. Next year, maybe 8. Finally, they're being nominated every year, 12, 15 times from all over the world, and then they win. So, yeah, you don't get, and so all through those times, every year, you're being looked at, you're being reviewed. They have external reviewers. They have their own internal reviewers. It's an amazingly complex process, and all carried out, for the most part, under great secrecy.
Wow.
Fascinating. Thank you. I find that so interesting how they do this in such secrecy and
It's phenomenal because I'm pretty well networked, and I really would have thought if I ever was going to win the prize, I would have picked up some rumors that year. Nothing. Absolutely, it was a total shock.
Isn't that the best kind, though?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That made it so much more fun.
Bob, thank you so much for spending your Monday night with us. We could be talking for hours. There's so much more, including how a cardiologist became a cardiac patient and what that was like when you can understand everything that's happening and on the screen, and your recovery, and how you kept the research, and how you negotiated for your lab. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. I encourage everyone to check out A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm by Dr. Lefkowitz. Well worth a read, but you might be laughing out loud, even if you're the only person in the room. So I just want to get everyone set for that. Guys, thank you very, very much. Dr. Lefkowitz, where can people find out more about you?
That's a good question. An excellent place to start would be on the Nobel website, nobelprize.org. Search my name, and you'll find lots of references, of course, including my autobiography, which is a good starting place.
And that's what you had to write during those 2 months between
Yes,
October and December.
exactly right.
Does it ever get old to say that? You can look me up on the Nobel website.
No, absolutely not. In fact, it is a life-changing experience in the sense that it really does change your name, so that I am no longer introduced as Bob Lefkowitz. My name is Nobel laureate Bob Lefkowitz. I think one of the things I've been fortunate about, and perhaps at the basis of my humor, is that I've never taken myself too seriously, nor do I now. So for me, it's just a lot of fun. And sure, everybody talks about imposter syndrome, but I suspect most Nobel laureates have that imposter syndrome. I certainly do. Every
single extreme high achiever I've ever interviewed, from Nobel laureate to Olympic champion to astronauts, they all have it. They all have it. Well, that's interesting. Interesting. Every single one. Yeah. So this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you to Nobel laureate Dr. Bob Lefkowitz, author of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stockholm, and to our incredible panel, Janice Lintz, Dr. Susan Bernstone, Dr. Bruce Wiley, and Susie Katz. You can find all of our information in the chat, how to reach out to us and how to find out more about Nobel laureate Dr. Bob Lefkowitz and his autobiography. Great read. Everyone, thank you very much, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.